Welcome to Our Special Lives. I'm Laura McGrath, and today I'm talking with two friends of mine, Jason and Heidi Evans, and we're talking about what happens after trach surgery. If you're considering a tracheostomy for your child, you won't want to miss this episode. And before we get started, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share. Hi, Heidi and Jason.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. So Heidi and Jason, you guys just went through trach surgery with your son, Jackson. And I went through trach surgery with my son, Finn, about 10 years ago. And so I thought today we could just kind of talk as parents and kind of inform anybody who might be watching this about what to expect after trach surgery, because it can be really scary before you have it done. And I thought hearing from some parents who have been through it might be really helpful. So with that, why don't we just start with the result, which is you guys are through the woods, you're through the surgery, your son's had his trach now for at least a couple months.
Right.
How are you guys doing with it? Are you glad you did it? How are things going?
Yeah, actually Jackson is sleeping so much better. He has actually has not slept like this ever. Yeah. So it's nice that we go in and we check on him and he's actually breathing through his trach and he's, we don't have to worry about walking in and something has happened to him. So it's just so reassuring knowing that he's getting a good night's sleep. And we weren't sure that it was the right decision for him, but it's just been amazing.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Or just to let the audience know. So your son has special needs and he had severe sleep apnea, which was causing his oxygen saturation level to become extremely low overnight. And so that's why he needed the trach.
Correct.
Yeah. He would stop breathing. We had multiple studies done. He would stop breathing about each 30 seconds. He'd stop breathing and wake back up. So doing that over the course of a night, for most of his life, of course, he's not getting a good night's sleep. So,
yeah.
Which affects his behavior in his life, throughout the day and that type of thing. So,
sure. Yeah. So now that he's sleeping, how is he doing better during the day?
He is. It's he works now and with his trach and he at his level of understanding things, I would say it has improved. Just from getting a good night's sleep and, maybe thinking a little bit clearer at his level has really helped him.
That's awesome.
And he says he sleeps, which is nice.
Yeah, and he focuses better too. When you can see it in his face, when his eyes, when he looks at you, you can tell
he's really focusing more intensely.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. And you were saying also before, because I think he was getting kind of hypoxic during the night, he would get up and walk around constantly at night. So he's sleeping through now.
He is. He will still move a little bit, but nothing like we would be up all the time with him throughout the night, switching beds because he would get in with us and then his snoring and him stop breathing just would wake us up and then we, would be worried about him. So overall, it's been fabulous. And I think for him, if you were to ask him, he would say, that he's glad he has it.
And we do ask him and every time he said yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so good to hear. So my son got his trach when he was 18 months old. So my son has CP, he has a brain injury, and he was doing pretty well up until he was about a year old. Actually, I take that back. He needed a surgery when he was 3 months old because his airway was kind of impeded. It was kind of like he had sleep apnea, but all the time. And then when he was 18 months old, it had gotten to the point where he was, the sound that he would make when he was trying to breathe was just so crazy. They call it stridor. And it was just like, it sounded like he was gasping for air with every breath. Right. And he really stopped being able to engage with us because he was just having so much trouble breathing. That was just kind of all his body was able to do. He lost so much weight. He was just emaciated because of the work to breathe. And then kind of on top of that, because he had such a turbulent airflow from like trying to breathe in, but having all this tissue in the way, he would throw up almost incessantly. So it was kind of like just this huge issue with breathing and throwing up, and he couldn't sleep through the night. We couldn't sleep through the night. It was kind of a nightmare. So he had his trach surgery when he was 18 months old, and I literally couldn't believe it. I mean, I was so scared going into it, but just seeing him laying in that hospital bed and not hearing him struggle to breathe, it was like incredible. And then he stopped vomiting all the time, which was incredible.
Right.
And within about a month, he gained 30 pounds. And like now I literally can't imagine what life would be if he hadn't had that trach. I mean, it changed his whole life. It just, his quality of life went up like 1,000%. So it was super successful for us too. And so I think it's just important that we talk about this up front because it's so scary, and you just wonder, is it all going to be worth it? And, I think at least our experience was like 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was one of the hardest decisions we've had to make for him. And on top of that, for him to understand, why did you do this to me? With having someone who's special needs that can't grasp, why this is happening to him. So overall, it's been remarkable.
Yeah, that is so good to hear. Let's talk about before you got the surgery. What were some of the issues that you guys were most afraid of when you were trying to decide like whether or not to get him the surgery? And it seemed really overwhelming and scary and all of that. Like, what were the issues that you were thinking about that were the most, scary or gave you the most anxiety?
Well, they had told us that at his age, he was at the point of he was going to start developing issues with his internal organs because of the lack of oxygen. So that was definitely the scary, one thing that made us start going through these decision patterns of what can we do to fix this?
Yeah. And then when they said the trach is probably the answer, what made you hesitate to get the trach? I mean, was it just the idea of it?
I think it was the idea of it. It was, it basically you're putting a hole in your child's neck. And then on top of that, even though he's so dependent on us, it was just another fear of what else could go wrong from that, not knowing anything about how to care for a trach. I think that was a big part of it. We haven't even gotten to some like the summertime and how he's going to be affected by that, whether he would be able to work with a trach, just to be able to carry on what he considers his normal life. Was he going to be able to do that? Those were kind of like our things that we questioned the most. But I think more of the surgery and what was involved with that was our scariest thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nursing care, we were expecting him to have to go through just from talking to other people, but I know other people have to go through it. But Jackson, so far, he's been able to do. We can do everything ourselves with him.
Fortunately, yeah.
Fortunately, so that's a good news story.
That really, really helps. Yeah, I think I was the same way. I was just, it does seem so abnormal to put a hole in your child's neck. But it's funny because you go get a cup of coffee and people are like, they've got the holes in the ears and the holes in the nose and the holes in the lips. And you're like,
true.
It's actually not that big of a deal. We do these things to ourselves all the time,
Right.
We breathe through a hole in our face. So, breathing through a hole in the neck, but it takes a little while for your brain to get wrapped around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was definitely scary. I mean, we would go through sleep studies and we would go through, he had his tonsils removed. We went through everything we could possibly go through before they said, Heidi, Jason, this is what has to be done for Jackson. And if not, he will not be with you. And I think that was our eye opener. That was like, we have to do this. no matter what, we
Yeah.
have to do it. And it was a lot of thinking and
Yeah.
just like grasping it and to make that final decision. But whatever was best for him, we had to do, and we knew we did.
Yeah.
I think we just wanted it not to be that.
Yeah.
And this was in our minds, this was our last option. You know, everything else fails, we have to do this. We understand that. So we tried
Everything.
different medications. We went through like 3 months of that, and that didn't go so well. So looking back now, I wish we had just gone with the trach before we tried all these other things. But
I'm really glad you brought that up, because same here. I mean, we tried a bunch of things to like make his secretions, like his saliva a little bit less, and, tried all these things, and it was just like failed experiment after failed experiment. Meanwhile, he's like losing all this weight, he can't breathe. And, it was just like, I do wish we had gotten it earlier.
Right.
It would have
And
saved.
they told us that they said, once you do it, you're going to want to know why you didn't do it sooner.
Yeah.
And for a doctor that performs a surgery, and it's not the surgery itself, I don't want to say it's no big deal, because it was a big deal, but it was such a short surgery. And in the doctor's eyes, them knowing all about it, of course, it was like, it's the best thing for him, and you will, be glad that you did it.
Yeah.
And wish you had done it sooner. So
yeah, and going into it, with everything else being a failure, you're thinking, okay, well, this is probably going to be another failure issue, because that's what we've dealt with our whole life with when we go to the doctor and we try this, let's try that. But this was a great success.
Yeah, I also had a little bit of that too, because we had this like vomiting issue, and I wasn't sure, nobody had really put that together for us. It was only in hindsight that we could really see that the vomiting and the airway was all related.
right.
And, I think my big thing was like, I was just so overwhelmed with his care in general already. And then
Right.
to add the trach and all that brought. And I don't think they do a very good job of explaining like the specifics of how to care for a trach before you get a trach. And so
Right.
you're only left to imagine,
Yeah.
like how crazy it's going to be, and
Right.
so I think that was part of it for me.
Yes.
But one of the things I'll never forget, we had a medical supply order delivery coming in. This was right before his trach. And the therapist who was like delivering his feeding tube supplies was like, oh my gosh, you guys could totally handle it. She's like, I swear. She's like, if you got the G tube, you totally got the trach. It's not a big deal. And I was like, all right, that gave me like a little bit of confidence,
Yeah.
to know that it wasn't going to be,
It's just
something.
something you're not used to. It's something, I mean, there's a learning curve to everything. But when it comes to medical stuff, unless you're a doctor or a nurse or something like that, it's like, we don't do this.
Yeah.
We will now, but we don't do this. So it's just scary for anybody that has to come into this type of situation and navigate through it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the vomiting. Jack didn't have the vomiting, but he had a choking issue. He would wake up at night and just start choking, almost like he was choking on his own saliva or whatever. But that, of course, ended up being connected to the airway issue. And since he's gotten the trach, we haven't had that issue anymore.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that. All right. So what did you guys do to prepare before the surgery? Like maybe what did you do? And in hindsight, do you wish you did anything else or differently?
Yeah, I don't think anything we could have done. We did research. We talked to some people. We talked to you.
Mhm.
We talked to some other people. We talked to some nurses, and it was still a very scary thing for us to go through. So even with talking with everybody, it helped. It did help, but it still was something that we were just, gosh,
And I think
I
that
can't believe we have to do this. But
Yeah.
our first thought was, let's get on Facebook and kind of reach out to our distant friends or whoever we have as like a networking on Facebook, because we are in a group with special needs people, and just friends that have a family member or somebody with a trach, and we got a ton of responses from it. Maybe not everybody's situation was Jackson's situation. A lot of the children were young, and they were just 3 or 4 years old. So we were like, we want to know somebody that's 22, 21 years old who has a trach. What do they do? Can they live their life, what they consider their normal life? How does it stop them from doing anything that they would want to do? And honestly, we looked everywhere on all kinds of YouTubes and whatever. And I found this one girl that had a trach put in temporarily for an issue that she had, but then she didn't have to live with that, which was great for her. But she was the only person that I could see, like, how do you take care of that? And what are we going to have to do to take care of it? So doing a little bit of research, talking to doctors, talking to you, talking to friends, really helped. But we did not have our own situation where we could compare it to somebody else's. So we just had to wait and see what happened,
Yeah.
day by day. That's how we live our life. So
Yeah. And as far as like, just kind of like on the technical end of things, did you guys end up like making some calls about your Medicaid waiver? Did you kind of, I feel like you were making a lot of calls before Jackson's surgery to kind of get things lined up.
we did. We had found out with some through you, some through other people, that the waiver that we currently had, that we could not have our attendant care for Jackson any longer with a trach. And so that was a whole thing that we had to have him moved over to the tech waiver. But for Jackson, we have not, for his particular trach and what he can and can't do, we take care of it ourselves. And he's actually learned how to do some things himself under our supervision. So right now we're still kind of in the middle of whether we're doing right now we have the CCC plus waiver, but we have not transitioned over to the tech waiver. One, because of getting an attendant as a nurse, because you have to have a special, I don't know what you would call it.
An LPN or an RN
LPN,
typically to take care of a trach. Yep.
Right. And we have not, we haven't had to do that yet, but we researched it all, and we did have to change insurance companies because we did think that we were going to go with the tech waiver. So we're actually still in that process, but we are still on our old waiver right now.
Yeah, I think it's just good for people to like think about and make phone calls, with their coordinator, because the trach kind of brings with it, the need for nursing. Typically in your situation, it's awesome that you don't need that, but typically it brings a need for nursing. It brings a bunch of extra supplies. It brings other stuff. And so typically, even if the child's already on a Medicaid waiver, they need to get on a different Medicaid waiver, which is in Virginia, it's called the tech waiver. I imagine that other states have kind of a similar Medicaid program. And it's just kind of good to do that up front, because where we ended up getting caught is we kind of came home, we didn't know anything about, the tech waiver versus a regular waiver. And, we didn't have things in place to get extra nursing. We were kind of at that point reliant on our nursing agency. They weren't very good about telling us, what we were eligible for and how we needed this other waiver and how to coordinate that. So it was just a lot of kind of heartache when we got him home from the hospital, because we didn't have it set up, and we didn't have, a nurse, for example, to like be there overnight to suction him and things like that. So it was just like a lot of sort of painful nights and days when we came home, until we got it sorted out. So I guess that's my big thing. That's what I didn't do, and I kind of regret it.
Absolutely. And you had put us onto that. And honestly, it's great to have somebody to help you navigate through that. But jumping through the hoops that you have to go through with your particular, like when we switch insurance companies and understanding the waivers, not everybody had the same answers. People had to go back on our side and say, well, I've never heard of that. Let me go back and check. So there was lots of phone calls, a ton of phone calls. It's very frustrating. You take great notes of whoever you speak to. And the phone calls are so important to make prior to going in, because it is stressful. No matter what anybody tells you, it's stressful, and you don't need that on top of pushing papers and calling people. All you want to do is care for your child once that the surgery happens. So you definitely want to have that in place prior to the surgery.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And if you, I don't know, did you guys have a medical supply company before?
We did for the suctioning.
Oh, we
for
did. We
What was
had
it
for his CPAP
his
and
CPAP, right.
BiPAP,
Yeah.
the different machines.
Okay.
But we ended up having a different company that we
Right,
ended
yeah,
up going
yeah,
through
yeah.
For his trach supplies.
Yeah. So that's like another aspect that people should just be aware of, is that you need a medical supply company, and that kind of needs to be set up before you leave the hospital at the very latest, because you can't get home with no supplies.
Right.
That doesn't work.
And to be honest, the information that you had given us in the hospital, because you were like, don't leave the hospital until you do X, Y, and Z. And it was so very helpful to have that. And when we were in there, our care coordinator, she was like, boy, y'all know your stuff. And I had my notebook and I was reading things off and checking things. And she was like, oh, nope, I'm going to get that for you. I'm going to get that for you. So it's good to have a little bit of that knowledge prior to going in, so that when someone tells you no, and you come back and say, no, I can, and to be able to fight for whatever your child or your person needs in that situation, because you don't want to go home with nothing.
Yeah. And, and the other thing was, I think Finn got his trach at the beginning of 2011. And I don't think YouTube was a thing.
Right.
So I just kind of felt like I was alone on an island. You know what I mean?
I understand.
So I love what you guys did, reaching out to the Facebook community, just
it's good
reaching
for a lot
out.
of things.
It really is. It really is. And it's just also, I think, so helpful and validating that other people have been through it and, survived, and the kids are, better off for it. Can you talk a little bit about your experience at the hospital?
Well, both of us, when it happened, of course, we were like, this is the worst day of our life, just because after surgery, there was a lot of swelling, and he couldn't open his eyes because some air had gotten in between his skin. So his face was swollen, his eyes were swollen shut, and it was
scary.
Yeah, it just really dropped.
He was sedated, right?
He was.
Yes.
Yeah. So on top of COVID, in all of this, they had in our situation, they had less hospital staff. They had their rooms were full. So we actually ended up staying in post-op for 2 days.
It was 2 days.
I think it was 2 days.
Wow.
So our situation was not the norm. But you have to be prepared that things may not be normal that day, whatever the reason is. And then they were able to put us, once we got through the surgery and we were able to see them for the first time. It is scary to see, and it's scary to hear them, as is any surgery. But the doctors and the nurses were very reassuring that things were normal, and that it would go, swelling would go down, or he would be able to do this or that. And he made his marks, and we were able to finally get into a room and had therapy come in, and everybody was very knowledgeable on the shifts. We were at MCV. They did a great job of coming in and helping us and letting us hands-on, because I'm more of a hands-on person versus just looking at somebody doing something. So I wanted to really get in there and learn to do it ourselves. And I think that really helped, not being scared of what you had to do. I will say that the very first time that the doctor came in, after, what was it, 3 or 4 days, they do the trach change. And when
he had been sedated up until then.
No, he was sedated only until After his surgery, he came out of
Right.
sedation. So he
He
did
was
not have
still on-
any,
Yeah, he was still on pain medication.
Right.
Though, so.
but he was not sedated where he couldn't talk to us, or he couldn't see us and like communicate how he could communicate with us.
Yeah, he probably didn't remember. He was probably sedated during the time we just spoke about the worst day of our life. His eyes were swollen shut. He doesn't remember that, I'm sure, because he was, like you said, sedated on pain medication, just come out of surgery. So that's good.
But when he went up to the third day, he went up to his room, he was awake,
awake,
and he was not in any additional sedation.
Okay, gotcha. Now, one thing that I just want to prepare people for, when he first started, maybe waking up, making sounds, or trying to talk to you, I'm guessing that he wasn't wearing a passy valve. Did his voice sound really weird to you? Like when he was trying to talk or make sounds, did it sound off?
Right after surgery, yes, everything was off. Until we really got into the room, I think we could ask him questions, he could shake his head, but he did not communicate with us until we got into the room. But Jackson was actually able to talk over his trach.
Okay.
A little bit, to say yes or no.
He would take in a deep breath and then say it.
Okay.
So it did come out of.
Because just in case somebody doesn't know, the trach kind of bypasses the vocal folds. And so if you're breathing in and out through your trach, typically the air over your vocal folds is what allows vocalization. And so if people can't talk over their trach, as you guys are talking about, which basically means that you are basically getting extra air over the vocal folds to some degree. It sounds weird. It sounds more like a hollow kind of sound of the voice. And so I just want to point that out to people because that might be a little rattling.
Yes. Yeah. Of
but
course.
We did get the PMV in the hospital. We didn't have to wait till we got here to get our first medical supply stuff. And when we heard him talk, it was like
a relief.
Yeah, it was great.
Normal.
Yeah.
So PMV stands for passy mirror valve, and it's a one-way valve. So somebody can breathe in through the trach, but they cannot breathe out through the trach. And what that means is that when they're exhaling, all that air is going over the vocal folds and then out the mouth and nose. So it allows them to make normal vocalizations. So it's this little purple valve that you can wear over your trach. Now, sometimes if kids have had a lot of pulmonary issues or things like that, they have to work up to wearing the passy mirror valve. My son could only wear it for 5 minutes at a time. And then we had to take it off because his sats would kind of drop if we put the passy mirror valve on. And now we put it on him for maybe 20 minutes at a time, but he still has to work extra hard because he still has all that floppy tissue in the back of his throat. So when he tries to exhale through his mouth and nose, it's still extra work for him. But I'm glad that Jackson can wear his kind of sounds like all the time.
He can, and he doesn't.
Yeah, well, he coughs a lot, so it pops right off. He had the spirit valves that hold it onto his, the neck.
Okay, the trach tie. Yeah.
It's constantly popping off. But if he wants to make a full sentence, we're like, put your speaking valve on so you can talk. But he just sometimes uses it, sometimes he doesn't.
Yeah. So getting back to the hospital. So you guys are there. He's day 3, day 4, doctor comes in to change the trach.
Yes. So that was you weren't there at that.
I wasn't there.
He hadn't come back in yet because only one of us could stay at the hospital.
With COVID and everything, yeah.
So when the doctor was like, "Oh, we're going to take it out," and when that moment when he did that, I grabbed the doctor because I was like, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Just see that opening, and because that was the first time that I saw it, and it was horribly scary. It was. I'm not going to lie. I just took a deep breath, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not going to make it," and it ended up being just fine. The second time that we did it before we left, it was fine, but it was very scary.
Yeah.
And now we've done a few trach changes and it's no big deal. You know, it's just like putting in a cannula in now. It's the same kind of process, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when they were suctioning, like, did they teach you how to do that at the bedside, or how did that kind of training go?
They did. The nurse did that.
Yes, they came in, they taught us, they showed us all the different pieces and the equipment and, what did what. And then they would, come in and they would deep suction. Some of them went deeper than others. And it was amazing to see everything that came out of that. But, he had to be suctioned quite often in the hospital. So during the night, I would suction him, which I'm glad I could do it. And then, if I needed the nurses, they were there, but he needed more of my care, I think, during the hospital stay. So I would say, again, it's just very important to kind of get in there and get hands-on as soon as you can, because you will be, you're going to be going home with them. So you might as well take the time you have in the hospital and have somebody there in case you need them to learn it. So,
yeah. I mean, one thing that, which I didn't know, which I learned in the hospital, is that when kids get trachs, typically they produce a lot of secretions just because that area has just had surgery and there's just extra saliva and just extra mucus and all of that stuff. And so,
right.
For the first several days, I just felt like we were constantly suctioning him. And I got really overwhelmed because I was like, is this what it's going to be like?
Right.
But it's typically not. I mean, from what I hear from other people, that's just very normal at the beginning. And then it really sort of dies down once you get home. The other thing that I got overwhelmed about is that in the hospital, when they were suctioning Finn, they were sort of doing sterile suctioning, which meant that the nurse would put the gloves on, and then they would get a suction catheter, which is just like a thin tube, and they would attach it to almost like a vacuum in the wall of the hospital bed, in the wall of the hospital room. And you sort of take that little thin tube and you stick it inside the trach, and it just sucks out, any of the saliva or mucus that's in the trach, and that clears the airway. Well, when you're gloving up and doing this sort of sterile suctioning thing, and then you literally unglove, and 30 seconds later, he needed to be suctioned again. I was just like, this is insane.
Right.
But when we got home, the medical supply company gave us the sleeved suction catheters, which we did not have in the hospital. I guess they're more expensive, so they generally don't use them in the hospital. I don't know. But anyway, the sleeved catheters, you don't have to glove and do all that stuff. You just pull the sleeve down, the little tube is exposed, you suction, and then you can pull the sleeve back up, and you don't have to go through that whole process. So do you guys have the sleeved catheters, I assume?
We don't.
We don't.
But when we got to, the first appointment at Dr. Nord, our ENT, the nurse came in to do suctioning, and she had already had gloves on. They weren't sterile. And she just took the tube out of the wrapper just at the bottom where she had to connect it to the suction machine. Mm-hmm. Everything else stayed in the wrapper. And she just used her other hand on the tube, the part that didn't go all the way down. So, to me, that makes sense. I mean, everything was sterile. She opened it up, she pulled it out, and she held it about right here. And you still have another, 8 inches here where you have to put it in. So it was still sterile.
Yeah. Well, the nice part about the sleeved catheters is you can use them, over and over and over again for hours on one catheter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's just much easier from a care perspective.
And actually, we are not using the catheters anymore.
He doesn't need to be suctioned.
No,
wow, that's so great.
Yeah, we will ever so often, but we have everything ready to go if we need it, but it's just, we have not had to do that, thank goodness. But we will, sometimes we do have to use it.
He still has the mucus and blood at times, but he's able to cough it up and it comes out. And and then
you just wipe it off.
Cannula, so we take the cannula out, maybe twice a day is what we do that with that for, and we'll put a new one in, and that'll solve the issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yeah, so you could speak more to the cat on the catheter, but in the hospital, yes, everything was sterile and you had to, and we, like you said, we were just like, how in the world are we going to do this? And I think every nurse that came in and every doctor that came in, we asked, are we going to have to suction him like this every single second of our life for the rest of our life? And they're like, no, 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 this is just what happens right now. So
Yeah.
we're like, okay, all right, we can do this. But
Yeah.
it did seem like forever.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was like one part that was really overwhelming to me. So I had kind of a different experience when Finn went in, and maybe this was because he was so young, but he was sedated for like a full 5 days until they did the first trach change. And then they did the trach change, and then they were able to kind of like bring him out of sedation. But he was, how long was Jackson in the hospital?
So he was in there for 6 days,
7
I think it
days.
was.
Okay. Okay. I think Finn was in for like 10. And one of the things, and I think I mentioned this to you guys before Jackson had the surgery, but Finn was given morphine to keep him sedated for that 5-day period. And he
Mhm.
ended up becoming dependent on the morphine. And then they tried to wean him off the morphine with methadone, and they couldn't wean him off the methadone. And so that probably resulted in us staying in the hospital a couple days longer because they had to send him home on methadone. And that was like a whole side thing to the trach surgery. In hindsight, we now use other things to sedate him. We use something called Precedex to sedate him, which is a non-opioid sedation. It's actually an anesthesia. And, for him, that would have been a much better choice had we used that with the trach surgery, because it took us 3 months to get him off the methadone. And we ended up having to check him into the PICU and do a rapid sedated detox, where we basically had to sedate him for 8 days, which is the half-life of methadone, and take him off methadone cold turkey. And it was not an easy process. He kept breaking through the sedation. It was, the worst 8 days of my life, which is saying something coming off of a trach surgery, but it was just, it was really, really tough. So, one of the other things I regret not doing before the trach surgery is having a better understanding of how long he was going to be sedated and what was going to be used to sedate him and what the risks would be of that. But again, this was 10 years ago. Maybe they don't sedate people as long, but I think it's definitely a question worth asking because it was just
Absolutely.
so problematic for us.
Right.
So we talked a little bit about being in the hospital, the sedation period, you go through the first trach change. And then did they do like a training program for you in the hospital, or was it just the hands-on day-to-day stuff?
No, we had people come, a therapist come in. We had speech come in, a speech therapist come in to kind of go over things with us, and then just to take care of trach care, we had somebody come in. But at that point, I felt like from me doing so much and Jason doing so much in the hospital, that what they were kind of reflecting and telling us about, I knew that already just from what I learned in the hospital and what I watched the nurses do and the doctors do, and taking notes and stuff like that was just, it was just very important to kind of get in there and to do that. So for the therapist to come back or the care coordinator to come back and refresh our memory just on everything it was great. They, they did a great job with that, answered any questions that we had, and ask questions about anything. No question is a silly question.
And take notes.
Yeah. So I would say that speech came in, and because Jackson was able to speak over his trach, they were like, well, a lot of people can't do that. It's good that he can. But they went through the PVM,
PMV.
PMV,
Patient
and
monitoring.
different what are the other things?
The humidivents, the noses.
Yeah.
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 And went through that with us as well. So, but as far as having, like a humidifier and stuff in our home and that type of thing. And what we could use, what instead of using that, which you may want to touch on that, they just went over everything, all the different gadgets.
Yeah. There's
Seems like there's just so much.
There are a lot of things. I remember, and just in case anybody doesn't know the nose that we're talking about, it's called a humidivent. And basically it looks like a wine cork and it fits right over the top of the trach. And it's got 2 plastic filters on either end. And so it doesn't help with vocalization, but what it does do is it filters the air so that you don't get particulates, especially if you're like outside and there's pollen or what have you. You don't get particulates in the lung, and it also keeps the humidity in the lung from escaping through the trach. So it keeps, the lungs and the trachea a little more moist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finn won't wear his, but
Jackson won't either.
But
in theory, that's the way it's supposed to work.
And they told us the PNV does the same thing if you would keep his PNV on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But like we mentioned earlier, he keeps it on, but it pops off. He didn't put it back on. So
yeah, we're in that same boat. And I remember we had our trach done at DC Children's, and they came in and did like a class with us on everything we needed to know. And same with you, like we were kind of at the end of our stays and we had been doing a lot of the care. But I just remember I felt very overwhelmed because it was a lot of information in a short period of time. Mm-hmm. And they were also, trying to be helpful, but kind of helping us to see like the consequences of things that could, cause the trach to get plugged. For example, they were like, don't eat chocolate chip cookies. I'll never forget this. Don't eat chocolate chip cookies around your child with a trach because the chocolate chip could pop off and land in the trach. And I was like, it was like, don't use like beads, like beading, like crafting projects, be very careful because the beads can get like stuck inside a trach. So I was like, poised for danger around every corner with chocolate chips and craft projects. It was just, it was a little overwhelming, but I just want to say that it's like very normal to be overwhelmed at that phase, and Absolutely. It will become like second nature. It's hard to describe, but it
is. It's like, well, it's kind of like bringing a baby home and you're like, oh, now what do I do with this? What do I do with this baby? And, you work through it and you learn how to change a diaper, or, whatever the situation is. Everything becomes second nature and you just go with it, and then you're like, wow, we did this. We all are doing this. We're good.
Yeah.
We feel like we're coming home. We're like, oh God, we're by ourselves now. What's going on? But we worked through it. We were good at it. So
how did that first trach change go?
She did it. I couldn't do it. I mean, she did it at the hospital with the doctors. But
I did it upside down.
Yeah, she started going backwards. I was like, Jack was like, but
they were like, it's the other way. I'm like, oh my God. But it was, he's fine. He's
okay,
fine.
Good. Perfect.
He looked at me like, Mama, why you do that?
Oh my God.
Yeah. But no, it went well. And, now we just, we still do things together. Like, well, when I had to go out of town and Jason was here and his trach came out.
Yeah, it popped out. He was playing video games and I forget what happened, but the little Velcro band came off of the neck band.
Yeah.
And his trach just popped out. So
yeah, and it just comes right on out.
He called me and I went in there. I was like, oof, I wasn't ready for that, but we worked, we got it back in.
Yeah, so Daddy did good. I didn't learn about it until I got back home, but everything was good.
Yeah, I didn't want to tell her while she was away that happened.
Yeah.
But, and we think, oh gosh, we got to get right back in. The hole's going to close. And then we learned later that, it would take a few hours for that to happen. So yeah, you're fine.
Yeah. And they will tell you that, if it comes out that you need to, get them in, either you put it back in, or if you're somewhere where you don't have your supplies with you, that, you can only wait but so long before, and it can close up quickly, but, you do have time. It's just when they tell you that at the doctors, it's like, oh my gosh, we're not going through this surgery again, certainly. So, we're just very aware of that, but we've settled down now as far as, all right, take it out and we're going to put this one in really quick. It doesn't have to be like that, but at first we thought it did.
Yeah, no, you can take your time to some degree. And we have these little like they almost look like pencil bags. And we have a trach and a little thing of Surgilube and a trach tie in there. And we kind of have like one in the car and one, like anywhere we might need to do a trach change. And that's been
Right.
really helpful.
Yeah, we have a backpack like that, and we just, leave it in the car or
Yeah.
put the neckerchief
Yeah.
everywhere, but yeah.
But that, that is one thing, as far as preparing to come home. You had done a video of how to organize, I
Oh, yeah.
think.
Uh-huh.
And just to, we had all of that ready before we left for the hospital. So that was super important because it's,
It's one less thing you have to worry about, like
Right.
other things.
and
so.
there are like your first delivery of supplies is like, we've had our counter full of stuff that we needed, and we
Yeah.
organized it and stuff, and it was great to have it, and it's easy to go and just grab it as we need it. But that was a great video that you did on
Yeah, they're the clear over the
organizing.
door shoe organizers, and we use them for all the medical supplies because there's
Yeah.
just no other way to keep track and then keep your order straight the next month because
Right.
you go through some things faster than others. So
Right.
so that's important. All right. So we went through like what to expect when you're at the hospital. Are there any other issues, any other things that, you think are important for people to know? I know you brought up swimming.
Hmm.
I can tell you that, kind of what we do. Well, I mean, first of all, Jackson's bathing, right? He's able to shower.
Yeah, I get these bibs on Amazon
Uh-huh.
that go over his trach, and he's comfortable with those, and he takes a shower by himself.
He's
Okay.
able to do that.
Yeah.
He did get some water in there one time and, coughed. We
Yeah.
all laughed about it, but it was just a learning experience. I think he was in the bathtub,
He was in the
and
bathtub,
he
yeah.
would go, he went down too far and he got water in it. So, there's always, I don't think that, I mean, we're so cautious to be careful with him, but nothing that we have done has harmed him. And you think, well, what if, and it can
Yeah.
always, you can do that all day long. But you gotta laugh about some of the things
Yeah.
that happen and just roll with it.
That's
Yeah,
right.
looking back, most of the stuff after the surgery, most stuff we were being told and being taught how to do, we were, oh my gosh. But look, now that, he's everything's healed. He does very well with it because he's older, he's 22. So he's able to do a lot of things himself or let us know when it needs to be done.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier than we anticipated it being.
But swimming is an issue. And we haven't gotten that there with him. He's definitely a underwater diver. And so that's going to be something that, he's not going to be able to do anymore. That's not the end of the world. He can breathe and sleep at night, and he's with us. So that's all that matters. But it's that is one thing they can't do. So
Yeah. Well, so we bathe Finn. He has like a bathing gurney, and when we bathe him, we use a hand shower, and we use one of those noses that we talked about, and that just kind of prevents, because I mean, we have to shower around his neck, and we have to wash his hair and stuff, and that is really goes a long way in preventing water from going inside the trach. So, so that's something that I would definitely recommend if you have a hand shower, can use a hand shower. That definitely helps. Or, Jackson's able to shower himself. Baths do get a little trickier. for sure. We do take Finn in the pool, but he's got like a special flotation device that keeps like his upper torso out of the water. So he can still swim and splash around and all of that. But, you know, he just can't submerge, you know, from the neck up. Yeah, you just have to be careful with it. And, you know, because he does like to knock it off, we have to make sure that it, you know, stays on. And we actually have a rule just for safety that like whatever adult is in the water with him, you know, there has to be another adult out of the pool, just in case something were to happen to me or I was black out or something like that, you know, that somebody else can come in. Cause I think with the trach, there's just, you know, that heightened risk of, you know, something happening. So anyway, so that's how we
thing that we were kind of worried about too, is that Jackson likes to, well, before when he was in school, he was manager for a lot of the athletic teams. And so, but he still likes to play football out in the field with the other kids and they let him play, but you just have to be more cautious of not hitting that. And, or if he's playing basketball for, you know, he just has to watch things a little bit closer. So that has been something that he's, you know, just has to kind of work around. But he's done great with it. He plays basketball. He still lives his life like he would typically live his life. And that was just one thing that we're like, can he do that? Can he still play basketball? Because that's something he loves to do. He can definitely still play Xbox. So we are golden there.
One thing I remember, Finn used to be a stomach sleeper before he had the trach surgery, because that would actually help to open his airway. And when you have a trach, you really can't sleep on your stomach. I don't know. Was Jackson a stomach sleeper?
Yeah, he's always been a side sleeper or a back sleeper.
Okay. Yeah, because that was a little different. The other thing, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, when you have a trach, you get this little machine, and it's like a little humidification system for your trach. And so, you know, most often the doctor is going to recommend that you sleep with that humidification system on. I assume you have one.
We do.
Yeah.
But we have not had to use it. You got the humidifier that we keep by his bed.
And the ENT actually told me that, because we mentioned that he keeps taking his mask off and things like that. He said, well, just before he goes to bed, put a milliliter of saline solution. They gave us some syringes at the hospital.
Yeah.
A milliliter of that into his trach, and he's going to cough a little bit, but it, you know, wets his lungs enough, I guess, to keep him moist during the night.
Yeah.
And he actually has done it himself a couple of times, which we don't want him to do, but he's comfortable enough with to do that, but
yeah,
we don't like him doing that. But
yeah, that's great.
I think it depends on their situation of what their needs are for different things. Jackson's trach needs are different than Finn's needs are. So everybody just has to figure that out. But the humidifier was a big part in the hospital, because we were like, do we have to do this at home too?
Yeah.
And yeah, we came home with it, and just to have that him like tethered to something was just like another something we had to do. But the nose was helpful for him to be able to use if he needed it.
Yeah. So when we came home, because, you know, Finn was still dealing with, I would say, a lot of extra secretions when we came home for probably about a week or two. And so we like had the humidity collar on him all the time and all of that. And then we kind of realized that we almost basically weaned him off of that and just onto the nose.
Right.
So that was kind of another thing, because the whole rig is like a bit of a setup.
It is. Yeah, it is. And another thing tied through to their neck, or, we just were like, gosh, this thing is just a pain. It helped him, but like you said, you can wean them off of it, and they were lucky enough to be weaned off of it. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, because of the vomiting leading up to the trach, we had to do pump tube feeding, which is where you're on like a feeding pump, and it just kind of does this continuous drip of food into your stomach, because he was vomiting so frequently that they didn't want him to have a whole lot of stomach content. So they didn't want him to have like a whole bottle of food in his stomach.
Right.
And so when we got him home from the trach surgery, like he was still doing the feeding. So he was like, had all these tubes on him and stuff. And I'm like, okay, we're not doing the pump feeding anymore because he's not throwing up. We're just going to go back to regular feeding. So we kind of had to build that up a little bit. And then I was like, he doesn't need the humidity collar. We're using the nose. So I finally got him free from all of these
Right.
like tubes and wires and all of that. And that was pretty amazing. But yeah, you might need that humidity system, you know, for a while, and you might be able to wean off of it after a certain amount of time.
Right.
Yeah. So end of the story. You're here. You've lived to tell the tale. We both have. Everybody's smiling. So, you know, your lives seem to be like relatively, you know, in a good place.
Right.
Yeah. We're getting more sleep too now.
Yeah.
So
everybody's getting more sleep.
Yeah.
The other thing too with the trach is because there is so much secretion and stuff, that they use the 4x4, which is just a split 4x4 gauze that kind of covers the stoma area, and, you know, will kind of absorb some of that, some of his secretions and whatever, you know,
blood and mucus, whatever.
Blood, yeah, and mucus and stuff like that. So that was another part of his ensemble when he gets ready in the morning, is to have that.
We call it a bow tie.
Yep, and then there's that.
When you say blood, you don't freak everybody out, because the blood is still there, but the ENT looked at it a couple weeks ago and he said it's just coming from this. There's got one little blister right above here when the trach goes in, but his lungs look great. I mean, I saw the pictures, I saw the video. I was very impressed with his lungs looking so good.
Yeah. And then sometimes after you get a trach, every so often, the ENT might want to do a scope. Have they talked to you about this?
Yeah, that's what he did. Yeah, that's what he did a couple weeks ago.
Oh, they did do a scope?
Yeah, okay. Everything looked great.
Yeah. So they basically put like a little camera. Did they do it through his trach or down his nose?
They did his trach, through the trach.
In his trach, through the trach. And so basically they have a little probe with a camera, and they kind of just stick it in, and they look around and make sure there's no granulation tissue, which is kind of like scar tissue that can build up in the airway from the trach, you know, from irritation from the trach, or just because. And if there is that little bit of granulation tissue, the ENT can kind of snip it and get it out of the way so it doesn't cause problems or block the airway in any way.
Right.
Yeah. Finn's actually due for one of those. So you're reminding me. Yeah. And there's just a couple of extra doctor's appointments that come with it. So you go to the ENT, you know, probably like a little more frequently right after the surgery, right?
Right after the surgery, yes.
Now maybe once every 6 months, he said, or something like that, or a year, depending on how things go.
Yeah. And then are you guys seeing the pulmonologist as well?
That's who is following Jackson. We will follow him unless we need the ENT for something, but our pulmonologist is who is kind of guiding that now.
Yeah. So that's what happened with Finn. So the ENT did his surgery, and then we were basically turned over to pulmonology, and they follow the case. They do all the things he needs, including writing orders for all those medical supplies and all of that. They make sure that the, you know, Jackson's fully grown. So the trach he has is probably the trach he will have, you know, for a long time. For Finn, because he got it when he was so little, you know, our pulmonologist is kind of monitoring the sizing and upgrades, you know, and increases the size as Finn gets bigger. And then Finn needed a custom trach, like with a longer stem, because his was falling out too easily. Like if he turned his neck or just got his finger under there or something, he was able to pull it out like super easily. It was coming out multiple times a day. And so when they did that scope that you just talked about, they were able to actually measure the length of his trachea. And his trachs are probably about, maybe 10 millimeters longer than a standard trach, just to give it that little bit of extra trach on the inside so it can't come out as easily.
Right. Because it does. It just pops right on out and comes out super easy. One thing that I wanted to mention too, Jackson has a lot of sensory issues. So we were worried about the trach tie being around his neck and irritating him because he doesn't like tags in the back of his shirt. So that was one big thing with us. And we were like, how in the world is he going to keep that on? He's adapted so well to it.
Really good
and, that was one thing that, you don't have to change it every single day. And, you just kind of, when it looks like it needs to be changed, you change it. And so the trach ties are great to have. I'm not sure. I know you can get different kinds, but the one we have is it's Velcro. So
is it the Dale? Is it the Dale trach tie?
Light blue
with the stars.
No, it's just
the adult one is light blue, and it's got the tab in the back, the adjustable tab in the back, and then the 2 Velcro ties.
Right. Yeah. And that's what we hook his Pessimeer to.
Right.
So that
gotcha.
It just hangs there.
Okay. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to mention is that we just found, because Finn's been in the Dale trach ties for a long time, but he's outgrown the pediatric ones. So we were kind of looking around for a new trach tie, and we've just found, because he moves a lot and stuff, that tab in the back can actually be kind of scratchy on the back of his neck. Right. We found some, they're called Neotech, and they're basically made of neoprene, and they don't have that tab in the back, and you just adjust it by slightly longer tabs in the front.
Okay.
And it is awesome. And you can use them over and over and over again. And the medical supply company that we both use is carrying them.
Okay.
So you would just reach out to, your contact there and see if they can add them to your order, because they're adding them to our order. But I'll link to those below in case anybody's interested in those. I like them because they last a little bit longer than the Dale, so you don't have to change them. Changing the trach ties can be a bit of a precarious process.
Yeah.
Just because, if your kid's wiggly and moving around, you're not changing the trach is staying in, but you're trying to change the ties and keep it in at the same time. So the less you can do that, the better. I think.
Right. Yep.
So having a tie that lasts a little bit longer can be helpful. So I'll link to those. But
the
anyway,
other thing I wanted to mention is that at night, sometimes Jackson's cannula comes out. So, that's one thing you think, oh, they have to have that in there the whole time. I mean, we wake up in the morning and there's his cannula sitting there, and, we'll just be like, all right, come on down. Let's get another one put in. And he's fine. That it happens, and you just kind of go with it. And there's nothing that is going to mess that up or mess him up, not having their inner cannula in there.
Yeah.
In the morning.
Yeah.
And then funny story, I'll tell you this. We have River, our dog, and Jackson in the morning before his meds, he's picks at things, he just can't keep his hands off of things. So him and River kind of go at it. And the other morning, River grabbed his trach tie and pulled his trach out of his neck, unripped it off, and took off. And we were like, well, your dog eats your homework or whatever, but when your dog takes out your trach, that's something completely different. But that's our funny story.
Oh my gosh, that is totally wild.
You just never know what's going to happen, but everything is fine. You just learn from it.
Yeah, I know. The other morning I woke up and I was looking at Finn. We've got a monitor on Finn when he sleeps in the kitchen, and he was making some noise that sounded like it was coming more out of his mouth than the trach. And I was like, that is so funny. And I looked, and the trach was completely out of his out of his trachea. It was just, he had pulled it out and it was just kind of laying there. But the funny thing was his oxygen saturation didn't drop at all because he was so calm, and all of those, tissues in the back of his throat were just kind of all relaxed. And so he was breathing completely normally. He probably had his trach out for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
Now,
so see, things are going to happen and you can't freak out about them. Prior to the trach surgery, we were in tears crying daily. I'm not going to lie to you because it's just so overwhelming. And, now here we are laughing about the dog and, taking the trach out, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's all fine. Everything is going to be fine.
Yeah.
So.
No, I couldn't agree more. We angsted about the decision, and it was just, for some reason, it just felt like such a hard decision. And then when we finally moved forward, it was the best thing we ever did. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned a monitor. We did buy monitors for different parts of the house. So we have a front living room where for the first
few months.
Probably first few months, he kind of found himself in our electric recliner and was sleeping there. And then I'd slept downstairs too, just so that we could get to him quickly. But we had like iPads. Was it iPads
connected to a camera that we could see and hear and talk with him through.
Okay.
Right?
That's a big help.
It's something good to think about. It's like,
what system was that?
We tried a few baby monitors at first, but the visual level one, the pixels weren't as great on the little monitor that came with it. So we ended up just buying a regular video camera that you can listen through as well, and it just put the app on our iPad.
Okay.
And another iPad in another room, just so we could always see him on different devices
throughout the house, especially if you're in a 2-story home or a big home. You're upstairs, they're downstairs, or vice versa, and it's just good to be able to see them, especially at first, just because you're like, I got to make sure nothing's going to happen. He's got everything's got to be right. So we kind of had them throughout the house, and they worked great. It was just like reassuring, a little bit of comfort.
Yeah.
To be able to leave them alone and go into another room or something.
Oh yeah, we started out with baby monitors, and then when we moved about 8 years ago into our current house, we ended up putting in like a closed circuit TV camera in his room.
Yep.
And then we have like a couple of computer monitors. There's like one in the kitchen, one in the family room, and one in our kind of finished basement where the nurse hangs out. And so, we can see and hear him, and they can see and hear him, when he's sleeping. So it was better reception. We found for us, it was better reception than a baby monitor, just for how we needed it. But yeah, I mean, you do need, and that's probably something to put on the list beforehand. If you don't already have a good solution, you need a way to monitor. Does Jackson sleep with a pulse ox?
He does not.
He doesn't. Did you get one, or?
No, not yet. He's actually going for a sleep study soon to check his oxygen levels. So we'll see how that comes.
And that'll be our first one since he's had the trach put in. So that was one thing that we have on our list to do coming up.
Yeah, because Finn sleeps with a pulse ox lead on a pulse ox machine at night, and so that's kind of how we know if he's got a trach plug or something like that. And that is a very, very loud alarm. So and then that comes through the closed circuit camera. So no matter where we are in the house, if that thing's going off in his room, like we can hear it everywhere.
Right. So
yeah.
And you're gonna like I said before, your situation is different than our situation, and there might be somebody else that's gonna have they may need more stuff than what you and I need. So it's good to keep an open mind of what you might have to go through. But as far as the whole trach itself, if you're questioning whether you should do it or not do it, it's completely worth it. I couldn't stress it enough. I mean, both of us, just to know that Jackson, his body is not struggling anymore, and that he's here with us, and he's just he's just doing what he was doing before we had, so many problems. Because it did get his obstructive sleep apnea got worse and worse and worse, and he was gaining more weight. And I mean, he was just kind of in a little bit of a downward spiral, and we had to just stop it. We had to figure it out. And that was our decision to do that. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think ours was similar in that he was, spiraling down, and you don't just get a trach when things start to go bad. You typically
No.
you
Yeah.
typically get a trach when things are just really bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you sort of do feel like your back's up against a wall and you don't have any other choices, but
Yeah.
it really, like we were talking about before, you wonder why, we didn't do it sooner, because
Right.
we could have saved him some suffering, I think,
I
for a few
know.
months. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
But
we all do the best we can.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And the surgery for a trach is not that long. Was it an hour and 45
Yeah,
minutes for
wasn't that bad?
Jackson?
Yeah.
And then the hospital stay was so long. So it's like this short time period for them to go in and do this surgery. It just wasn't that long. And it was amazing what it does
Yeah.
for a person. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking.
well, I'm
with
so glad
Yeah.
that you offered to
today.
have
Thank
us
you.
on here,
Yeah.
because
It's a great idea.
when we were looking for somebody, we didn't have anybody, and we said, after we kind of got through everything, it's like, we have to share our story with somebody, or if I see somebody on Facebook and it's like, anybody know anybody's got a trach? Yeah, call me, type thing. So I'm glad that you offered to have us on here, and hopefully this will help other people make a decision and realize that, you continue to live your life how you are. You just have to do a few extra things. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. Well, thank you
yeah.
so much. And
Thank you, Laura. We
yeah,
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
of
Appreciate it.
course.